for joining us for another Lectures with the March for Life. We're so happy to have everyone joining us today, especially while we're still staying home. We can still educate ourselves and dive into some really fascinating topics about the pro-life movement and the topic of abortion. I'm really excited for our guest today. We have Miss Carrie Gress, who has a doctorate in philosophy from CUA and is the editor at the Catholic women's online magazine, Theology of Home. She's also the author of several books, including The Anti-Marry Exposed and Theology of Home, as well as written multiple articles on the topic of abortion, pop culture, and feminism. And to top all that off, she's a mother of 5 and has been homeschooling since way before we even had to start doing that. So thank you for joining us, Carrie.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
This is just so fantastic. I love all the work that you've written up, especially the topic of abortion. You're such a great writer. And,
oh, thank you.
You make it definitely feel like you're talking to a friend when reading.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my background is in academia, and I learned quickly that people don't like to read academic work. So it was really actually pretty easy to transition into something much more accessible, I think, for anybody.
Oh, that's great. And I'm also happy you're able to join us. I know that you're homeschooling your kids even right now, and that we're fitting this in between some of their schedules. So.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you. It was good. They all got out of the house, so it's a nice break for everybody.
Well, if we just want to dive into this, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your background and what got you into the topic of abortion specifically and how it applies to pop culture and progressive perversion of femininity and motherhood and culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question and a very long answer, so I'll try and be as concise as possible. But I think it was about 15 years ago, I had this insight that really abortion will not end until we convert women and convert the hearts of women. But I didn't really have the answer to how to do that. I think that that's sort of been the big question mark in my life is how do you help women understand that abortion is not good for them, that it really buys into the lie that our children are an enemy and actually an obstacle to our happiness instead of a way to achieve happiness. So, I have a degree in philosophy. I thought, well, I'll just use logic. And, that fell to pieces pretty quickly in terms of just being able to convince people. I learned very quickly that logic is probably not the best way to start approaching the issue. And I have a good friend, Mary Lisa Carney, whom many of your viewers will know. She's married to Sean Carney, who runs 40 Days for Life. And years ago, I asked her, probably about 9 years ago, I said, Mary Lisa, how is it that you were able to save so many babies? And she said, I really just started by talking to women about something about them, whether it's their hair or their shoes or their handbag. And that's where the conversation would start. And, she gave me this information a long, long time ago, and it really stuck with me, like that starting on that very human level. And she said, it has to be something very sincere. I'm not making this up because women can see through that, but that was just a really great way to get started. And so anyway, that's been one of the things that has been in the back of my mind. And I wrote this book called The Anti-Marry Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. It came out about a year ago. And in that book, I actually did a lot of groundbreaking research on radical feminism. There are certain things that people details that haven't come out until recently. Mallory Millett, who is the sister of Kate Millett, has been talking about her late sister, Kate. Kate, for people that have never heard of her, she was featured on Time magazine. She was very much kind of a ringleader of the intellectual element of feminism. All of the women's studies programs in academia were founded or kicked off by her. And she wrote a book called Sexual Politics. In any event, Kate has since passed away, and Mallory is talking about Kate. And then you have someone like Phyllis Chesler, who is also another grandmother of the movement. And she talks a lot about a number of these feminists that have also passed away. And so it was interesting to see what they're talking about. And you can see, particularly, with Kate or in Phyllis's case, they point back to the fact that these women were really broken. Most of them had very awful relationships with their mothers. Betty Friedan is one of them. And so you can see where the movement was coming from. You had all these broken women that found this sort of camaraderie in their brokenness. But rather than seeing that they were broken, they sort of thought, well, this is a way to heal it, is for us to become like men, to strive to be like men, that we can be happy if we're going to be just like men. And this is, they now have a very sort of schizophrenic relationship between we want to be like men, but we want men to change and be more like women. So it's a really interesting dynamic that's going on there. But I think we live in a unique time where we are getting these stories out. And so I was able to compile them in the book and really just see what was the glue that held together women who are so different, looking at someone like Kate Millick, who was very intellectual, very much a Marxist, or someone like Helen Gurley Brown, who started Cosmo, who was very sensual and focused on the sexual side of things. And you can see that if it hadn't been for abortion, that all of these different kinds of feminism probably would have splintered and not been so powerful. And yet they were all kind of rounded up together through the glue of abortion, that became the thing that was really held them together. And you can see that even now, 50 years later, where something like the Women's March that happened, every woman is welcome unless you're pro-life. So I think that has been something that we have kind of missed. But the other element that was really fascinating to me was to even see how these women changed the culture so much, because it certainly was not the case that every woman was indoctrinated to be pro-choice, sort of the way that we are in the culture today back then. So how did they move us from being much more pro-life culture to, now being at the point where we're celebrating it? I think Oprah has spent $1 million on this site, Shout Your Abortion. So one of the ways that they did that was certainly with pop culture, and certainly with things like magazines. If you look at the culture today, this group of women control pretty much everything that influences women in the culture today, whether it's politics, Hollywood, pop music, even the novels that we read, academia, and certainly magazines. But they didn't come at us with Marx. There's no article in Cosmo magazine about the ideas of Karl Marx or of Margaret Sanger per se. It's all just very lightly sort of sprinkled in to what it is that they're doing. And so it's fascinating to see that they're using what Mary Lisa Carney had suggested, is you approach things in a way that people start to trust you, and they feel that there's this commonality and this common ground, and there's this comfort level. And that's really, I think, what has swayed the culture so significantly, is the fact that they understood this piece. And this is one of the things that I think we as pro-lifers kind of forget. I think we're very busy trying to get degrees either in law or master's degrees, or find different ways to make great arguments, but we're forgetting this very human element. And that seems to be something that I think there's huge room for growth for us as pro-lifers, to sort of start reaching out in a much more human way, rather than just starting with arguments. And all of this was brought home to me very, very distinctly a couple of months ago. I was voting here in Virginia, and I had my 4 kids with me, and I was pregnant at the time, and very obviously pregnant. And before I walked in the polling place, there's usually people outside promoting different candidates, and there was a tent of 2 women that were promoting a candidate that I was not going to vote for. And one of the women said to me, "Do you need a pamphlet so you know how to vote?" And of course, I was about ready to just unload and say, clearly, thank you, I know how to vote. But in the meantime, before I had a chance to respond, the other woman looked at me and she said, "I love your kids' boots." And it was the funniest experience, because I knew intellectually what had just happened, but emotionally, I was like, I could talk to you about these boots for like 20 minutes. It was suddenly I was a totally different person. The ice queen that was about ready to unload on the first woman was now just this very docile, happy woman, that wanted to talk about her kids' boots. So I think that was a real moment where I was like, yeah, Mary Lisa's wisdom works incredibly well. And I've actually heard from other people that work either in Intel. A woman contacted me that used to work at Guantanamo Bay interrogating prisoners. And she said the thing that was actually most effective for us in extracting information was finding this human level, again, where we can connect with people. So I think this is one of the reasons why pop culture is so important, that we, rather than allowing this elite group of women, which I've come to call the matriarchy, allowing them to paint pro-lifers as either doormats or, the recent effort to really slam Phyllis Schlafly as very power-hungry women. There's sort of no in between with when they're portraying us. And certainly The Handmaid's Tale is a great example of that they're trying to kind of box us into that mental picture for people to think on those terms. So that's really why I've started focusing a lot more on pop culture and where areas that we can find commonality to help really bring women back to the truth, because we know what we have to offer is really where happiness and wholeness and goodness and beauty reside. And so getting ourselves out there to show that, I think, is a really vital piece at this point.
That's fantastic. And you were just mentioning this, and I find this topic fascinating when you go into it in a lot of your articles.
Mm-hmm.
But you discuss how the media, and be this the news side or the entertainment side, often just completely ignores the millions of pro-life women in America.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, millions and millions of
Yeah.
women's voices.
Right.
They're constantly repeating that able talking point that the pro-life movement's led by a bunch of old white men, and they want to control women's bodies.
Right.
So,
No, and I think that's really interesting, because if you look at some of these talking points, these are the same talking points they've been using for roughly 50 years. And what that means to me is we haven't done a good job of responding that and pushing them into a position where they have to sort of change their footing. And because they've been so successful, because they do have sort of a lock on a lot of these ideas, and we haven't offered another way for people to sort of understand what it means to be a woman. So yeah, I think it's really challenging for us to start coming up with ways that we can start pushing back on that, especially because they control everything. So how do we, start I don't want to say infiltrating, but how do we start putting pressure on them in different ways? But, even listening to someone like Alyssa Milano, it's the same old tired content from, their grandmothers. And I think that's what's really sad, is that that they've had so much success with that. And they've had they're such powerful terms. Like even, I think it was a few months ago, maybe a year ago, one of the Williams sisters, if you remember this, got in trouble on the court for misbehaving. Well, what did she do? She blamed it on the patriarchy. So they don't anymore have to even define what they mean by the patriarchy or talk about that. They just throw the term out, and everybody's like, oh, well, the patriarchy is bad. And, we've been kind of conditioned to think that, rather than sort of thinking, forcing them to define what they mean by that, and being clear about what the actual problems are. Toxic masculinity is another one, and that was why we use toxic femininity in the title of my book, because again, how much is thrown at men for this toxic behavior that presumably they're exhibiting very wonderful gifts that men have to offer the culture. That's not to say that men are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We all know that we are very fallen creatures, but and there is a lot of blame out there. But we need to again make distinctions between what's toxic and what is actually a gift that should be used in an ordered way, rather than saying, we need to sort of turn ourselves into Paradise Island, like on Wonder Woman, where the women really rule. And I think that's been the problem, is that idea is so deeply dug into the culture at this point that we need to scrutinize that and really challenge it.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think we can challenge that false narrative that women do need to be running things, or that women who have differing opinions to the mainstream, their opinion doesn't matter, that we hear the term brainwashed a lot?
Yeah.
So how do we just counter that narrative?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where, again, we need to be really creative and start using our resources. And just a few months ago, I talked to a woman that she wanted some advice on just what she should do with her life. I think she was an empty nester. And she was telling me, since I was in grade school, I always thought I would go to law school. And she said, I'm really thinking about going to law school now. And I kept asking her questions and kind of digging deeper. And it turned out she didn't really want to go to law school. She just felt sort of obligated to do that. What she really wanted to do was get much more involved in design and working with her home and those kinds of things. And I think when we can think outside the box of what are sort of typically what we think pro-lifers should be doing, you can see that the Holy Spirit is trying to seed these different ideas in these different areas. There's so many women that are really interested in lifestyle and blogging, and yet there really aren't that many. As a Catholic, I know there aren't that many Catholic lifestyle bloggers. In fact, very few. Joanna Gaines, I think, is a perfect example of, obviously we all can't be Joanna Gaines, but this is a woman that's using her platform to be not a doormat. I mean, she's a very different kind of personality. She doesn't use her platform for political arguments and grandstanding. And yet she's considered the most popular woman. I think the last poll I saw, she was more popular than Oprah. So people are starving for this real kind of content that I think is authentic. And I think that people really are longing for it, hearing something different versus, even I've spent a lot of time in the children's book section at our local Barnes & Noble, although not recently, of course. But I'm always amazed at the books that are there for sort of the tween age girls. And it's, all kinds of just very radical feminist ideas that are embodying that, fierce is the new pretty, and girl power and being empowered. And there's nothing wrong with obviously women achieving incredible goals. But when our only goal is really to sort of compete with men, we have to stop and ask ourselves again, what does it mean to be women and to be feminine? What are the gifts that we have and that we can bring that are distinct from that? And I think when we highlight those, people start scratching their heads. And it seems like feminism in a certain respect too is kind of, it's growing threadbare, that it doesn't have the hold that it used to, because there are some alternative places where people can find it, but also it's also just gotten really over the top, and I think people are seeing through that as well. But the question is, then how do we harness that? How do we help direct people to places that are going to be ultimately much more fulfilling and life-giving than what's available out there right now?
Well, switching veins a little bit and jumping into the more scientific side of things, though I guess it also applies to pop culture. So in 2019, you wrote an article that I just love, titled or Hollywood's Abortion Obsession is Based in 1970s Science.
Right.
Awesome title. So can you explain how the modern pro-abortion narrative fails to address the advances we've made in understanding embryonic and fetal development over the past 50 years?
Yeah, no, I think this is a fascinating area also, again, where you can sort of see the slip showing with these sound bites, because it seems to be that the rhetoric still continues with it's my body, my choice. It's all these same kinds of clipped sound bites that have just been incredibly effective. But it's not paying attention to all these women that either regret their abortions. It's certainly not paying attention to, as you mentioned, what we know about embryology now, what we know about fetal pain. Also, even just that level of when a baby is viable has changed dramatically. Even in the several years, been having my eldest is 11, and I have a 3-month-old. So to see where that layer of viability is between even those 11 years is pretty incredible, what advances have come with science. And this is where you just hear crickets when it comes to these talking points, whether it is this very clear group of women that are very vocal about regretting their abortions and the grief that is very real, or whether it's about the baby itself and its development. And of course, that's why they work so hard to make sure the ultrasounds aren't seen. And, this whole clump of cells talking point is also another one that they love and is used over and over and over again when talking about what the baby actually looks like. So yeah, it's for a group of people that sort of are always kind of beating us over the head with science. It's pretty amazing to see how little science actually enters into their own talking points at this stage.
It's so true. So you mentioned this before, but do you have any really specific advice that you could give, especially women, on how they can make their voices heard in media, be that the mainstream or even social media?
Yeah. I would go further than that and say it's got to even start within our families, and within our with our neighbors. And this is why I love, Mary Lisa Carney's advice again so much, because it's so human and it gets us so much further. I've written a book called Nudging Conversions. It's all about helping bring people back to Christianity. And, it was based on my own experience of trying to bring my family back to the faith. And, again, I tried apologetics and it was kind of a disaster. And I thought, well, I'm just bad at this. I'm off the hook. I don't have to evangelize anybody. But what I did at that point was really started to be a better friend, a better daughter, a better sister. And it was in that transformation of my relationships with my family that's really where I started seeing major shifts, because they knew that they could trust me in the small things. They knew that I loved them right where they were, instead of wagging a finger at them, why aren't you going to mass on Sunday, and that kind of thing. But it was just a matter of just being joyful in who they were, instead of trying to get them to change. And this is, again, I think a huge opportunity for us as pro-lifers on very, grassroots in our homes, with our immediate family members, extended family members, and so on. But I think that this can also be effective in terms of forging relationships with people that we might not agree with, whether it's the media. I think we also feel very isolated oftentimes. I had a man on an interview that I was doing asked the question. He said, well, why don't women speak up more? Is it because you sort of secretly think you're still going to benefit from feminism? And I said, no, it's quite the opposite. It's actually the case that we're afraid. We feel alone, and we know that a lot of times the women that are out there are bullies, and we're not going to be left unscathed, whether it's our reputation or whether it's a humiliating event on media. And obviously nobody wants to have that happen. And yet I think this is one of the areas where we really need to step up in courage and find different opportunities to create the space where we can speak out. I think blogs are a great area, but I think even more importantly, we need to start investing in things like magazines. The fact that I can stand at the checkout and there's not a single magazine that I can look through at every page and be like, yes, I agree with this. I think Magnolia Magnolia Journal is about the only one that's there. And even design magazines, there's a lot of, and it's all, a lot of this is orchestrated. This isn't just happening organically among people, but it's an orchestrated effort to promote certain agendas within magazines. So why don't we have a magazine that I think there's so much that we can feature and that can be talked about under a pro-life umbrella, that I think that could go a long way in helping even different generations. And I've written a book called Theology of Home, and this has been a really amazing project because it talks about how our homes are really meant to be a foreshadowing heaven, but they can also be a foretaste of hell. And but this idea of looking at our homes very purposefully, of course, it's very timely right now. I had no idea back last fall when it came out how timely it really would be. But even looking at that idea of how our homes have this capacity, but this is something that we all share. It's a very common idea that we can talk about. And so it's been a fun book to publish because of the fact that I can give this book to just about anybody, and there's something in it that they can appreciate. But we also had it highly illustrated. So it feels it's like a coffee table book kind of feeling. Well, what do we have in there? We have great visuals of mothers with children. We have families. We have, things that visually combat that notion that we're doormats, or that we've been brainwashed, that show women in very healthy dynamics. And we know that women want these kinds of things. They just don't know how to go about getting them. So if we can provide visual content or podcasts, television shows, movies, whatever, these things people are hungry for. Like I said, Joanna Gaines, there's a reason why she's popular. It's not just because of shiplap. It's because she's really offering an incredible vision of what people want in their lives. And so much of it has to do with her relationship with her husband. She doesn't browbeat him, and she's certainly not a doormat when it comes to their relationship either. They have a really beautiful connected balance to them. So, and I would say, more than anything, what we need to do is obviously first pray and discern where God wants us to use our gifts. And instead of defaulting into thinking, okay, I have to get a law degree, or I need a MA in this theology program, or what have you. I think we need to be open to things that we're called to. And, my website, theologyofhome.com, and my book, Theology of Home, both of those started largely because I thought that was fun. And I almost felt guilty, like I'm having way too much fun doing this project. Maybe I should back off a little bit and do some more of the academic stuff that I need to do. And then when I realized, like, there's something to this, that there's a reason why this is fun. And if I'm the one that's enjoying it, then people that are reading it and on the receiving end are also probably having fun with it too, and feeling connected in certain ways. So using our gifts and finding different ways to create community and to really touch people on human levels, I think we need to be open to those ideas as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if you could give one piece of advice to the pro-life movement, what would it be?
Invest in magazines, invest in television, invest in Hollywood. It boggles my mind that here we are, the Catholic Church in particular has been the greatest patron of the arts in all of human history. And yet we don't have beautiful artwork. We don't have beautiful magazines. We don't have beautiful ways of laying out culture. And culture is one of those things. I think and I don't know if it's because people sort of have the expectation that priests or pastors or other people are supposed to take care of this. But as women, we have the capacity to bring this kind of beauty, visually stunning beauty to other people. And that's not to say that men can't be involved, but this is what speaks to them. In fact, I marveled a few months ago. I was at an airport and I had a couple of magazines that I was done looking at, and I didn't want to throw them away. So I just sought out some other woman, looked kind of similar in age. And I said, do you want these magazines? I'm done with them. And she said, sure. Well, I can't imagine giving anybody anything in an airport other than that they would accept it. You wouldn't give them food. I certainly can't give them a suitcase. But a magazine, they know we're sort of open to. I don't know if people would do it now, but the point being that there's something about a magazine and just flipping through it visually. And they have, the matriarchy has used it just brilliantly. Again, orchestrating these ideas and peppering these ideas into it. And I think that we're sort of behind because we're trying to make these arguments. Well, we have all the arguments. We have all the science. We've done these things that over the last 50 years, it's now time to really start rejoicing in the gifts that we have and the gifts that women want. Because it's all right there. We just have to put it on a platter that they are able to receive it with, rather than trying to use logic or apologetics or other arguments we need to put it in a softer context that they can actually absorb and feel edified by.
I love that. And put a glossy cover on it.
Exactly. Yep.
So as we close this out, how can all of our viewers best follow the work that you're currently doing and any that's up and coming?
The best place to find me is at theologyofhome.com. It's a very small effort to sort of start not only reaching out to women who are already believers, but to reach other women that maybe aren't Christian or don't have a deep faith, but to sort of offer some really great content. It's an aggregate site, but it also leads to our book that I've co-authored with some friends, theologyofhome.com, or the book is Theology of Home. And then we've also started a mercantile where this is the other area that we have really, I think, let down our guard is in merchandising and providing products for people that are going to help them feel like God is present in their home, that they can really rejoice in their families and what it means to actually be a woman. So all of those pieces you can get there at theologyofhome.com.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Carrie. This was so fantastic speaking with you today. It's
my pleasure.
Always a joy to just dive into your works
and
thank you. To your words.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I also encourage everyone to follow the March for Life on social media and at marchforlife.org for more resources on how to better advocate for the unborn and to be a voice of life in our culture. So thank you to everyone for watching today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.